Hey guys, this is Greg Jones, or 0779 for dragtheboard.com, and today I'm going to be bringing you a two-part video on playing looser in the low blinds using the Holdem Resources Calculator. So this is basically going to be two parts that are going to discuss how to use the Holdem Resources Calculator to start to develop some ranges that you find you can use when games are getting a little bit tough. And you want to, as you get a little bit more experience, you want to start to open up your ranges and start to incorporate some more complicated lines like raise fold and raise call lines around 12 to 15 blinds deep and that sort of thing. This is a really cool new calculator. I've used Holdem Resources website for a long time. They're holdemresources.net, not .com. And they've put out this new standalone product which you can buy, which is really really cool. So the games are getting tougher, and as a result, more effective low blind play is helpful. This is going to help you get more edge from tighter games, and that's why the motivation is there to use the Nash calculator, because as the games get tougher, typically what they're doing is converging more towards the Nash ranges. And if that's the case, and all the players are pretty good and converging towards Nash ranges, then sometimes using something like a Nash calculator is more effective than using Sit and Go Wizard, because you can derive a lot more information from it quickly. Whereas Sit and Go Wizard may give you some basic ranges, but something like this is going to give you a lot of other aspects of ranges that you can't really easily get from it, like raise 3-bet call lines and that sort of thing. If you are stealing 1.5 big blinds to the low blinds with standard 1500 chip stacks, you're typically getting about 2.7% ROI from that steal. You're adding like roughly 3% to your chip stack, and the ICM tax is going to reduce that by a little bit. Another reason why playing loose is good is that even if even if you're playing against bad players, one of the things you're going to find as the games get tougher is a lot of the equity in the games comes from the bad players, and they may spew it off quickly, and you want to be the player that's at the table who's getting that equity from them. So playing a little looser gives you a little more options as far as trying to go ahead and attack like limpers and get into pots heads up in position against them alone. So I like this Holdem Resources Calculator. I've been playing with it for a little bit here, and I've got some interesting things to say about it, which I think are going to really help to motivate some of this low and sort of low mid blinds looseness. It's a really cool new tool for sit and go players. Helps evaluate lines like raise versus shove. It also helps you evaluate lines like raise call versus raise fold. So if you're going to not raise all in and then somebody's going to 3-bet you, then it can also give you ranges for calling that 3-bet, which is really helpful and something that Sit and Go Wizard doesn't do easily. So the Holdem Resources Calculator performs an ICM-based Nash computation. You just put the stacks at the table in, the blind levels, and any antes if you've got them, and it'll give you a full Nash decision tree for all of the positions at the table, and we'll take a look at what that actually looks like. But it's a fairly large table that shows you basically every possible iteration of decisions. You raise, and then under the gun +1 raises, or under the gun +1 folds, and under the gun +2 raises, and that sort of thing. It's also really easier than Sit and Go Wizard to use for analysis of multiple lines. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the Holdem Resources Calculator up, and we're going to take a look at it. So let me see if I can shrink this down just a little bit so you can see more of this in the window. So right here, you got a really nice tool. You can see all the quadrants of things that it gives you. It's got different hands that you can get, and then different it shows the ranges and all of the equity values for each of the hands in those ranges. It's got an outline where you can select different players, and it's got your hand equity versus difference graph, which I like to look at a lot and hold them in Sit and Go Wizard as well. So let me just go ahead and show you how to do one basic hand calculation, and then we're going to take a look at some of these ones that I've already done, which which we can learn some things from. So when you select a new hand, you can basically get one of two options, which is push fold. That's going to give you basically your Nash equilibrium ranges if you push, and then this raise fold, which is going to give you Nash-based equilibrium of what hands are worth raising, and then it's going to give you some other options for people to 3-bet and that sort of thing. So let's say we're starting off from scratch, and we've got 1,500 chip stacks, and we're 9-handed still in the low blinds. Actually, one of the nice things that this calculator does is it actually retains the last input that you put in. So you can see here, this is a different hand that we're going to look at soon. So you don't have to keep putting these numbers in every time like you used to have to do on the website. And let's just look at the 1530 level. We're going to assume no antes. And when you push next, it takes you to this window where it asks you what your initial raise size is going to be in big blinds. At 1530, we would normally raise 3 big blinds. And it's also going to have this selection button, which has additionally allow for open shove. This is going to give you some hybrid ranges. I don't really want to take a look at these because I prefer to actually look at the raise lines versus the shove lines independently. However, you can have it actually sort of look at both together and then recommend which parts of the range it would like you to shove versus which parts it would like you to just open raise. So here you'd click finish, and then it's going to go ahead and chug away a little bit here, and it's going to give us a result. So it sort of, from what I gather, it actually runs fictitious play iterations, and from that it sort of looks at a pseudo equilibrium. The more iterations you run, obviously the more precise it's going to be, but you know, it's doing a lot of work on each one of these. So 300 seems to be the default, and it seems to work pretty well. And the bigger decision trees, like these ones with 9 players, take longer to calculate than like 3-handed, for example. So it's chugging away, and what it's basically going to give us is the same thing that I already calculated in this other tab. Oops, it looks like it didn't, so need to go ahead and figure out why that is. So notice it's all in there still. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stacks, 50, 30, 20, 15, 30 blinds. Raise to 3 blinds. Yeah, that should have worked. So, oh no. Alright, so it came out right. So it basically gave us the exact same thing we've got in hand number 2. Alright, so now you can see from this that there's really no point in shoving in the low blinds, but you can see that the ranges this thing is going to give you are much wider than the ranges that you would see from like my book's open raising chart. For example, my open raising chart is typically something like ace king, ace queen suited, and pocket jacks, pocket tens, or something like that from under the gun. And you can see here instead that it's recommending a much wider range, like 19%. And then when you go in and you look at this range a little bit more closely, what you're going to see is that, let's get the whole thing in here if possible. What you're going to see is that a lot of these are very marginal hands that are in the range. The range that's actually displayed up here is the range that has bolded hands. So like king 10 suited, which is slightly grayed out here, is not in the recommended range. And you can see that this is sort of -0, this is +0. They're all 0, a lot of these ones that are in the white. And so this is how I would go ahead and start to think about the types of hands that you might want to add into a slightly wider opening range. You're typically, under the gun, though, not going to want to get too crazy. The place where you're going to want to open up your ranges is going to be more in like late position. So I wouldn't get too wild with playing with these. I would look for hands that have a decent edge, like jacks. Here, ace king is good. Ace queen is probably pretty good. Maybe ace jack. hands that are just a little bit wider than the range you normally would open, and I would just start to add those hands into your range a little bit. I think Ace Jack suited, Ace Queen off might be good, for example. I don't know that I'd really go ahead and mix in King Queen suited just because they're so King Queen because they're so easily dominated. So this isn't much more exciting, you can tell now, actually, than the initial ranges that we'd like to start raising from early position traditionally. But when you start to get into the deeper ranges, like middle position 3, for example, you can see these start to open up, and actually a lot of these smaller hand values start to move into the profitable range. And so, by middle position, I'm opening up usually 9s or 8s, something in that range. And so the thing to remember is that it's not just this output over here of ranges that it gives you that's important. It's also important for you to actually dig into this a little bit and see what looks like it's going to work for you. Actually play-wise in game, what's actually profitable, and what makes sense depending on your game conditions. But by the time you get down to like this hijack cutoff ranges, you can see now that we've opened from like 19% down to about 40% on the button. And typically I don't like, the way this opens up a little bit, I don't prefer some of these hands, but you can see now that our sort of raising range of any two broadways, pocket pairs aren't in here. I would definitely include those because you're going to have position post flop, which means that even if there's a lot of overcards, you're still going to be able to defend them. You might want to start to think about putting in Jack 10, 10-9 suited, that sort of thing. But really, this is just going to give you an idea of what hands are actually profitable, and you can start to mix in like the King 9, King 8, any ace, any pocket pair, any two broadways is sort of my typical recommendation. And you can see that if you're adding some of these hands in here, you may not be adding them in so much for their immediate value as you are from just the pure steal value that you get. So these values are 0 based on the equilibrium. But if players are playing too tight out of the blinds, then some of these hands might move into being profitable that are otherwise not profitable based on the equilibrium calculation. So I'd also like you to consider the fact that these numbers aren't always absolute based on game conditions. And you can start to think about mixing some of these weak kings, mid queens, that sort of thing in. Mixing in some suited connectors, especially if you're at the 10-20 level on PokerStars rather than 15-30. In fact, maybe that would have been a nice one to look at. It's super easy to do. It shouldn't take too long. In my book, I talk about the fact that if you're playing on PokerStars in the first level, you might be able to mix in some suited connectors. So let's let that chug away while we're talking. And so these are the ways that you can start to analyze slightly differently from Sit and Go Wizard how you might like to open up your ranges a bit. And you can see, these hands that become unprofitable, they'll become 0. None of them become super unprofitable. So you can really kind of tune your range in any way that you feel like is appropriate to widen it. And then you just need to be cognizant of the fact that that's going to lead to a lot of new low blind play type situations that you may not be comfortable with. If you're starting to play hands that are more easily dominated, you're going to have to really work on your low blind play a little bit and see if you can keep yourself out of trouble basically by not pot committing yourself. So here you can see now with adding the that additional low level PokerStars that this is now saying 60%, and you can see that it's added in, and well, it didn't add in too many of the suited connectors like I'd sort of thought it might, but it added in 1 or 2. So let me just shelve this for a second, and we'll go back to the charts. All right, so with low blind ranges, I'd say check out all the equities and sort of make sure that you realize that most of the good hands that we've already recommend for sit and go play are already, pretty easily recommended in that chart. But you can always take a look at the values of the hands and figure out what to add to your stealing range, especially from late position. And then you need to identify also when your goal is basically just stealing or whether you're raising for value, because some of those hands that are in your junk range that you're adding in are not necessarily that you're raising them for value post flop as much as that you're just raising them because you're trying to steal and wrap up a couple percent in equity from when the blinds fold to you. So make sure that if you're widening your ranges dramatically in sit and goes, that you're widening them dramatically from late position, and don't widen them up so much from early position if you can avoid it. All right. So another really interesting situation this calculator can look at is this sort of 12 to 15 blind range, where you're in that awkward area where you'd like to raise because you're sort of too deep to shove, but at the same time you might want to consider shoving. And if you do come in for a raise, it sort of is getting you close to pot committed, so you need to really accurately be able to figure out when you can raise and call a 3-bet. So let's take a look at another one of these hands. Basically, here we've got the let's take a look at the list. So hands 3, hand 4, and hand 5. Okay, so 4 and 5, I've basically put in 7 equal stacks of 1900 and some chips, and I've asked it to calculate both the raise call range, which is this hand 5 tab, and the open shove range for around 12.5 blinds, which is this hand 4 tab. And one of the things you can see right off the bat when you're looking at the under the gun 7-handed range is that it's wider. It's 12%. It's recommending 12% raise versus 9% shove. So we need to sort of build what I would call a hybrid strategy, and that's going to be where we look at the values of raising all in versus making a min raise, and then we try to decide which hands from the ranges are going to be best for a small raise versus best for shoving. Typically, we're going to want to make our small range with raise with a polarized range, which is going to be like the very best of our cards and the very worst of our cards that we're going to play. This is polarizing your range here is important because it gets more value out of the really strong hands, and it keeps people from, if you had a strategy where you just min raised your strongest hands and open shoved your weaker hands, people would start to catch on to the fact that that's what you're doing, and they'd start to call you lighter when you're shoving. Here, if you're min raising very strong and very weak hands, then they don't know whether they can 3-bet over you as easily with your min raises, and they also don't know whether they can call your shoves as easily. So it's a good way to have your strategy be really balanced. There may be times where you look at the shove versus the open raise range and you take the slightly less profitable of the two to keep it polarized, and we'll take a look at that I think in some cases here. But basically what you want to do is use this for guidance to build your strategy, and then look at the strategy and make sure that it makes sense. Because if your strategy, if the calculator tells you to build a non-polarized strategy, then you're going to need to make some concessions to make your game stronger rather than being easily exploited. Then finally, the word of warning is, again, we want to look for situations that really deviate from reality, like some of those hands that were really close to zero, for example. If they're getting really, really thin and it's telling you to open a range that's super wide, but almost the whole range does not have very good value, then you need to be careful not to incorporate ranges like that. All right, so let's take a look at the hand ranges that you could open shove versus min raise from under the gun for about 12 blinds, and just sort of look at how to build this strategy here. So what you'll see right off the bat, again, that we pointed out is that your open raising range is about 12%. There are a lot of hands in this that are sort of close to zero. and your open shoving range is also about 9%, and there are some hands in this range that I think deviate from reality in terms of wanting to shove under the gun seven-handed for 12 blinds with like ace 2 suited. A lot of these low suited aces, I just would never shove them because they're too easily dominated and there's too many people behind to call. So what I would do is the first thing I would do is I'd take a look at different hand types, and I'd start to categorize, which of these hands in the ranges work. You can see here the open raising, and then you've got this every position. What would happen if they 3-bet you, and then if you open up each of these positions, you can see what you should call with, or what all the other positions behind should call with. So, for example, if we raise under the gun, the button 3-bets all in, then the small blind should call with this, the big blind should call with this, and we should call a range of 3.9%, tens, ace queen suited, and ace king off. So I'm going to minimize those a little bit. And just looking at our open raising range now, I'd start with pocket pairs, and I'd say, okay, pocket nines are recommended for open raising. Pocket nines here are not recommended for open shoving. Pocket tens here are recommended for open raising, and they're at 0.42%. Pocket tens here are recommended for shoving, but they're 0.03%. So here, open raising tens is still more profitable. And I'd go through all these, and what you're going to find here is that I've made a little spreadsheet. I just put the initial raise range. I put the call range from big blind shoving on us, since they're probably the most likely person to re-steal, at 4.8%, and then the shove range at 9.1%. And I started to go through these, and you can see here I evaluated all the pocket pairs, and it turns out that for that, open raising all the pocket pairs is more profitable. Then you can see that in this range, shoving ace 10 suited plus, which is right here, 0.06, is more profitable than raising ace 10 suited at 0.02. So I got rid of all these ranges that are 0, and I started with ace 10 suited, and I said, okay, what's more profitable, raising or shoving? And it turns out that for that range, it's more profitable to shove any suited ace, 10 and above. And then I did some more analysis, and we find that it's more profitable to shove ace queen off, but it's more profitable to raise ace jack and ace 10. Here I decided to exclude ace 9 and below from the range. King jack suited is more profitable to shove. King 10 offsuit is more profitable to raise, and Queen Jack offsuit is more profitable to raise. And so what I did is I then took these and I built them in, and I looked at, for the raising hands, whether we could call them or not. So I made 3 ranges. One's called raise call. That's just your pocket nines up. And then I made one range that's called raise fold. That's the rest of these, because these don't fall into hands that we can profitably call in that 4.8%. And then I made a range called shove, which is just all the stuff that we can profitably shove, that was more profitable to shove than to raise fold. So now you've got this really interesting little chart where you've got this set of ranges from under the gun, where I would say this is now your sort of wider than just shoving, the recommended ace king and pocket tens or whatever is recommended by Sit and Go Wizard. And then I'd start to look at whether this is really a good idea or not. Because, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable shoving king jack suited here. And if we look at shoving king jack suited, it's profitable, but only mildly profitable. I'd shove probably king queen suited, but maybe not king jack suited. So what I'd then do is I'd go ahead and I'd I'd start to tune these ranges a little bit. Another thing you could do is play with these ranges, and then you could look at the profitability of individual hands in these spots in Holdem Manager. But that would take a lot of games before it would really converge on something you could trust. So I'd rather cut some things out of the ranges right off the bat and just be a little bit more careful. Um, because you're playing this raise call, raise fold, shove type situation, you can see that ace queen suited is sort of in the middle, ace 10 suited is sort of in the middle. Um, this should be ace queen off. Um, you can see that these hands are sort of in the middle of your range. Here, your raise call hands are actually pretty big hands, but maybe you want to polarize this a little bit and you want to shove, I don't know, queens and jacks and tens, and you want to min raise ace nines, and you want to min raise kings and aces. That way, But this does help you a little bit because it basically means you're not just raising your monsters. You have some things in your min raise range that are not monsters, which is pretty well polarized. Um, and then the middle of your shoving range is sort of middle hands and weaker hands, and I'd cut out the weakest hands um, from the shoving range just to sort of make sure those sit real well in the center of your range. And then I think you've built a really solid and much more dynamic range for your under the gun position. And so this is the kind of thing that I think is going to give you a lot more edge in today's games. I mean, obviously it was profitable to shove all of these hands. That it was also profitable to min raise. But the question is, are we going to be able to eke out more value, from this kind of hybrid strategy, and are we going to be able to sort of be more competitive in the games as they get tougher? So I think it's worth looking at this kind of stuff because it doesn't supersede PBJ in the sense that PBJ still works. All of those hands are profitable, but as the games get tighter, maybe it's worth looking at a strategy that's more like this hybrid approach. So let's take a look at this slide now. So the conclusions are: you need to identify which hands are for open calling, open folding, opening and then folding and then shoving. And you're going to create sort of a PBJ sheet that actually has all of these factors on it. And another thing I just want to say is it's okay to have more than one PBJ sheet because maybe your 15 to 10 blind ranges. This is really the most important place for this kind of open raising consideration. And then maybe after that, 10 blinds and below, you're really just going to want to move more towards an all open shoving strategy. But it's okay to have your PBJ sheet or more than one strategy sheet, and you don't need to feel like you have to have one or the other. You can have both these things out while you're playing and be taking a look at them both while you're playing. So in conclusion, Hold'em Resources Calculator can help open up your game a lot, and I think this is one of the areas that I sort of always avoided focusing on. I'd like to keep the sort of ABC S&G material real clean and really basic so that it was easily accessible to beginners, but I've gotten enough questions about these kinds of strategies that I felt like it was worth getting a more advanced video out there for people who are looking for more. Just remember that if you're going to play looser, 1-bet, 2-bet, 3-bet still applies. So you need to make sure that you're not ending up out of position too often. And so basically what, the really basic fundamental low blind play things still apply. And if you find that playing looser is forcing you out of being able to stick to 1-bet, 2-bet, 3-bet because you're playing out of position too much, because playing out of position typically causes you to lose an extra bet or not gain an extra bet from hands, and it makes playing out of position makes sort of things tougher because the other guy always gets to act after you. Then you need to tune those ranges, and that's part of the reason why I was saying that it's really better to open up from late position anyways, because that's going to keep you from playing out of position too often. But once you get involved in a hand with like Queen 9 or Queen 8, Jack 7, something like that, where you decide to open loose and then now you're in a jam, you got to remember that 1 bet, 2 bet, 3 bet still applies, and you just don't want to overcommit your stack in those situations. Post flop, you still need to be looking for value and building the right size pots with the right strength hands. And so make sure you use position post flop for your advantage. All right, so next time in this series, I'm not sure if it's going to be absolutely the next video. We're going to take a look at another range where we're sort of opening up the 12 to 15 blind range from more like the stealing positions, like the button and possibly the small blind. And then we're going to talk about some global issues with the calculator as far as generating your strategy that are important to remember. Things like how antes affect it and other stuff like that. So just sort of looking globally at how these ranges are changing with stack size and where it's okay to give up on the raise fold type stuff and just start to open push. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was informative. This is Greg Jones or 0779 saying good luck at the tables.